Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with another video. It's actually Thursday evening, April 16th, 2026. And I want to talk about something that I was kind of inspired to do some research on because I just was listening to a talk by Jeffrey Sachs, the renowned historian and economist. And he pointed out that the Israelis and the Americans have bombed and destroyed two universities. The university that is two universities in two places in Gaza and also in Iran. So I've been thinking about this terrible situation, and in my research, I came up with some thoughts on this topic. And this is called this particular phenomenon of destroying knowledge is called epistemicide, which means the destruction of knowledge or knowledge systems. So I'm going to read some items that I came up with and also give my comments on various cases of this situation happening throughout history. So this is some of this. This is like from Wikipedia. Epistemicide is the destruction of knowledge systems, where episteme means knowledge, and epistemicide has been a part of colonialism, in which a colonizer destroys the existing knowledge systems of the colonizers to replace them with knowledge systems controlled by the colonizers. And it is closely related to epistemic injustice, and cognitive justice seeks to challenge epistemicide. And it points out that this concept was developed by a particular individual in 1998. It's a Spanish word. I'm not going to try and pronounce it. He argued that epistemicide was an important part of European colonialism around the world, including in the Americas, whereby European philosophy had an epistemic privilege at the expense of other knowledge systems, becoming a new foundation of knowledge in the modern colonial world. And the term has been used to describe Israel's destruction of Palestinian knowledge systems, including its attacks on schools and universities. A woman, Rebecca Ruth Gould argues that epistemicide exists in relation to genocide, as scholasticide exists in relation to war. It attempts to erase not just educational institutions in their current state, but the very possibility of education in the future, in order to entirely erase the existence of a people from the earth. This is serious stuff we're talking about here. So I'd like to give some examples of this out of history. Probably the most well-known example of this was the destruction of the library at Alexandria in Egypt. And I'm reading off some of the sources that I discovered here. So the library of Alexandria was founded in the 3rd century before the Common Era, that is 300 years before Christ, and was envisioned as the intellectual heart of the ancient world, housing hundreds of thousands of hand-copied scrolls covering everything from science and philosophy to literature. The library was more than a storage facility. It was like a research think tank that employed scholars who made breakthroughs in math, astronomy, and medicine. The mystery of its destruction, people agree that the library didn't just burn down in one single event. Instead, it suffered a slow, painful unraveling over centuries due to war, shifting religious ideologies, and civil neglect. There were one of the myths is that Julius Caesar was involved in it. It was during a civil war between him and his rival in Egypt, and he burned his fleet down in order to protect it from being taken over. And the burning fleet spread and caught fire to at least the library itself, or at least to some storage areas. There's another case where religious fanatics in around 391 CE, that is 391 years after Christ, or the Muslim conquest that was 600 years after Christ. The reality is likely a combination of these events in a long period of decay. The destruction represents the loss of invaluable human knowledge, including lost plays, advanced engineering blueprints, historical records that could have fundamentally altered the pace of human progress. I'll mention that this burning down shows the fragility of knowledge, and it serves as a reminder to prioritize the preservation of our modern archives, data, and academic institutions to ensure that the intellectual breakthroughs of our own time are not lost to history. The next example that I want to give, which is kind of dear to me, is the case of Nalanda University. And Nalanda University was founded in the 5th century in Bihar of India. And it's one of the oldest residential universities. It was a global center of learning, attracting students from across Asia, and apparently in many countries, even in Greek culture and other areas. And under the guidance of thousands of teachers and monks, it taught subjects like Buddhism, astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, and medicine without charging fees. And it is believed that legendary scholars like Aryabhata led the institution. There's a story of Xuanzang, who was a very, very important Buddhist monk in China, and he went to Nalanda University and retrieved many Buddhist texts from Nalanda University and translated them. And fortunately, because he was able to preserve a lot of Buddhist teachings in those texts. However, Nalanda was not just a Buddhist university, it had many other departments. So apparently, Nalanda had survived 2 previous attacks by the Huns and also by another dynasty, but was rebuilt each time. Now, there's a story that there was a Turkish invader named Bakhtiar Kiliji, who was suffering from an illness and was cured by the university's principal, Rahul Shribhadra. But he became jealous of the fact that a Buddhist guy healed him, whereas his Muslim physicians did not. And because he was angry about that, he grew jealous and decided to destroy the source of that knowledge. Now, there's other indications that Buddhism kind of fell on hard times in India and basically was virtually wiped out. It wasn't just the Muslim invasions, but it was also the fact that the Brahminic class in India, that is the Hindu Brahmins, were jealous of Buddhism because Buddhism was basically saying there are no classes, and Buddhism basically promoted the idea of equality of consciousness of all beings, and the Brahmins didn't like that. And of course, and Muslims didn't like that either because they thought, there's no God but Allah. So so you have these kinds of religious and political jealousies going on. But the bottom line is that I've been to the ruins of Nalanda. The place was completely burned to the ground. And so the story goes that this fellow Khiliji led an attack in 1193, killing thousands of monks and burning the university's massive library, which housed 9 million manuscripts across 3 buildings. And according to the historian Minhaj-e-Siraj, the library burned for 3 months. Unbelievable. So the impact was that this was not just a loss for India, but for the world, because it erased an entire repository of ancient knowledge. Not to mention the fact that thousands and thousands, but the minimum was 10,000 people were slaughtered. These are like the greatest you're wiping out the intellectual class of a country These are like the top scholars at the top university of the ancient world in India at that time. And so I have a post here that it says, just reading from this is from archive.org. It says that Nalanda was a seat of learning that was first founded 1,600 years ago, making it one of the world's very first university. It was partly destroyed around 600 years ago, and Nalanda can be termed as the epitome of culture and the soul of ancient academia. One of the most important curriculum that was taught in Nalanda was medical education. There might have been a hustle and bustle of people in the whole area because in every day there would be hundreds of classes would be there. Various courses were being taught at the university. We had logic, we had astronomy, we had astrology, and all other subjects also were being taught, according from the descriptions of Xuanzang, that Chinese monk that I mentioned. And they speak of huge turrets, 4-story monasteries, and the astronomical observatory, and also the great university's magnificent library. There were 1,500 teachers. They were all very prominent teachers. There were students from Korea, China, Japan, and many other countries. India lost everything. India lost its soul when Nalanda was destroyed. Great and valuable books were here, and various aspects of life, all of them completely destroyed by the people, and archaeological proof is there. So, and I have a picture below which shows it was basically burned down to the foundations. Now there are other burned out buildings that are there. You can see some bricks, whatever is left of it. But this is a devastating attack on knowledge and on the people these are the transmitters of knowledge. So I wanted to bring that up as an example of what happens when you attack the intellectual class of a country. Now, and the next example that I give was the Nazi book burning and the death of German culture. I was born from a Jewish family, and my grandmother told me that her family in Europe had been killed by the Nazis. And so I asked myself, how did a culture that produced numerous musical composers like Beethoven, Mozart, Schubert, Schumann, Mendelssohn, as well as great writers and thinkers like Goethe, Schiller, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Kant, Wittgenstein, Marx, and later people like Thomas Mann or Hermann Hesse or Bertolt Brecht, and people like Freud and Jung, and scientists like Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard, and Otto Frisch and Rudolf Pilaris, Hans Bethe, Edward Teller, and Eugene Wigner. And in biology, Hans Krebs, Ernest Chain, Wilhelm Feldberg. These were all people involved in medical research. And in the social sciences, you had people like Karl Mannheim, Max Horkheimer, and Paul Tillich, were all those who left due to political unreliability, or that unreliability means that they weren't kowtowing to the Nazi ideology, or they were simply Jewish. So that was a terrible situation. And so this happened in 1933 under a Nazi law called the Law for the Restoration of the Career Civil Service. And the scientific impact was that this exodus devastated German scientific research while enabling the U.S. to win the race for atomic technology, which, it's questionable whether that was such a great idea either. But you have to understand that when basically Einstein went to FDR and he said, look, you've got some great scientists in Germany, and if you don't, they may be working on this atomic bomb. We know that atomic energy has great potential, and we better get that bomb before the Germans do, because if they get it, we're in deep, deep trouble. Now, it turns out the backstory of this, from what I've read, was that there was a scientist named Lisa Meitner who was also a famous German scientist. And she was basically, what she was doing was poo-pooing the idea of atomic energy. And so fortunately, between her denigrating the idea that there was something possible like an atomic bomb, and also Hitler, who was more focused on short-term weapons development than something that was far more theoretical. He decided not to pursue that, fortunately. But the point that I'm making here is that it appears to me that the enormous contribution that Germany had made to world culture through these famous composers and writers and philosophers and so on, the Nazis wiped that out, and Germany, from what I can tell, has never really recovered. And look at it now; it's falling back into its old, what's the word? Recidivist ways. They're going. Why did Germany, that had a good thing going with reasonably priced Russian gas, suddenly decide we hate Russia and we're not going to take your gas anymore, and we're willing to destroy our own industrial economy out of spite? And this goes back to the 1930s and the destruction of the intellectual class in Germany. Next, we have the case of Iraq. And there was a looting when the U.S. went into Iraq. They looted Iraq, and this looting has affected museums and numerous cultural and archaeological heritage sites that recognize Iraq's history and location within the cradle of civilization. Especially noteworthy is the looting that occurred as a result of the 2003 invasion of Iraq, such as the theft of nearly 15,000 artifacts from the Iraq Museum in April of 2003. They also, this invasion in 2003 resulted in the looting and vandalism of universities. They were largely unattended during the initial invasion, leading to the destruction of laboratories, libraries, and administration buildings. And also, the deterioration in security forced many students and faculty members to stop attending classes. The education system experienced a roughly 50% drop in attendance by 2006, according to a Global Institute for Conflict and Environment presentation. So this was a loss of intellectual capital. Faculty and staff, particularly those in higher education, became targets of violence, forcing many to flee the country, causing a massive brain drain. Going on here, so this failure of protection meant that critics blamed the U.S.-led coalition for failing to secure key cultural institutions, with looting and occurring while troops were nearby. Although many items were returned through amnesty programs, many more are suspected to have been sold into the international black market. And later, during the rise of ISIS, ancient sites like Nimrud and Hatra were deliberately destroyed, creating a secondary wave of cultural loss, according to sapiens.org. I left this out of my notes, but I was thinking that in the case of Syria, in the rise of ISIS, destroyed Palmyra, which was a famous archaeological site in Syria. So this pattern of these extremely destructive elements going into a country and destroying the foundations of its culture. This is like the roots of the consciousness of the people that is being destroyed by these wars. In terms of Gaza's university, by March 2024, the United Nations recorded more than 200 Israeli attacks on schools in Gaza, with at least 53 schools totally destroyed. By July 2024, all 19 Gaza universities had suffered severe damage, with 80% of university buildings destroyed, 103 academics killed, 90,000 students enrolled in higher education no longer able to pursue their studies. And in June 2024, another study stated that 76% of Gaza's schools required full reconstruction or major rehabilitation. And in August 2024, UNICEF stated 564, or 85% of all schools in Gaza, had been hit by Israeli attacks. And in 2025, an estimated 95% of school buildings had been damaged or destroyed. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, defense of what? Defense of chaos, states it targets schools because Palestinian militants use them for military purposes. Researchers looking into IDF's claims concluded the claims either lacked evidence or the evidence presented was misleading. When the IDF destroyed the last university in Gaza Strip, it destroyed it in a controlled explosion. Next, we come to attacks on Iranian universities and schools. As of April 2026, U.S.-Israeli strikes during the ongoing conflict have targeted Iranian academic and research infrastructure, with reports of over 30 universities and 857 schools hit. Key institutions, including Sharif University and Isfahan University of Technology, sustaining significant damage to research facilities. This doesn't even count the gratuitous attack on a girls' school, an elementary school, and killing 170 children. These attacks have focused on research-intensive universities, specifically targeting AI, computing, and physics laboratories. The Laser and Plasma Research Institute at Shahid Beheshti University was destroyed. In terms of human cost, report that 60 students and 5 professors have been killed, while at least 110 students from the Islamic Azad University system were also killed. This doesn't count the numerous nuclear scientists that Israel had assassinated in years before this invasion. So the scientific setback shows that the strikes have caused severe damage to critical academic infrastructure, including the High Performance Computing Center at Sharif University. And schools such as the Shagaya Girls' School have been hit, causing damage to educational facilities. And facilities included in quote-unquote dual research, such as the Pasteur Institute of Iran for developing vaccine and diagnostics, and specialized engineering hubs, were targeted due to suspected links to military development. So the international local response to this. Iran's science minister described the targeting of universities as a violation of international law. Epistemicide. The attacks have raised concerns about war crimes and the targeting of civilian infrastructure. Some analysis suggests that the attacks are part of a deliberate strategy to curb Iran's scientific development. While some, like the World Health Organization, reported significant damage to institutions, other reports detailed the destruction of data centers and academic laboratories. So here's my conclusion to all this. One of the main themes of my work is to show the extremely destructive and nihilistic nature of modern Western so-called civilization. As Gandhi remarked when he was asked his opinion of Western civilization, he said, "It would be a good thing." This worrisome trend is becoming increasingly clear. You could say that it started even in the US with the Scopes trial about evolution, where reactionary Christian theology refused to acknowledge scientific inquiry into evolution in the 1920s. Then came the destruction of the German intellectual class in the 1930s and 1940s, from which it has never recovered because of the Nazis. And following World War II, you had the U.S. war on intellectuals with the McCarthy era following World War II. The attack on leftist progressive thought, marked by the untimely death of FDR and the initiation of the Cold War under the untutored and narrow-minded shopkeeper, become senator and then president, Harry Truman, and then the assassination of JFK, Martin Luther King, Robert F. Kennedy, and leaders of the civil rights and peace movement, followed by attacks on the free press, Julian Assange, whistleblowers, the constant torrent of lies leading to wars, as noted here, the destruction of whole cultures in Iraq, Palestine, and Iran begs the question, where is this all heading? To me, it all looks like a dystopian, totalitarian society. There's a tendency throughout human history for narrow-minded, highly destructive individuals to enact their vicious, murderous impulses on centers of learning and culture. And this has gone on for since at least the burning of the library at Alexandria, and then Nalanda University, 9 million books burning for 3 months, and the murder of 10,000 to up to 40,000 Buddhist monks and all of the other attendant subjects that were taught at the Nalanda University. And then going forward to these attacks on Palestine and Iraq and Iran. It's this is just a very, very dangerous trend. And I felt that it was important for me to bring this to your attention, because it's not just a question of civilian infrastructure or about oil or all of those, or the dollar or all those kinds of things. We're talking about human consciousness. We're talking about are we as a species going to be able to maintain our consciousness and develop as a species, develop our capacity for knowledge, develop our capacity to transmit knowledge from one generation to the next so that we can progress. It looks pretty iffy right now. So that's the reason why I'm bringing this up. So thanks again for listening to my presentation here. And I hope you'll support my channel by giving me a like or a share, or make a donation to my Substack, or to buy me a coffee, whatever. But the main thing is that it's very important for us to spread this knowledge, the fact that intellectual life itself is under attack. It's not just the physical infrastructure. It's the very nature of what it means to be a human being, to be a conscious, intelligent person that is under attack. So that's what we really need to focus on. So thanks again for listening, and I'll talk with you again soon.